I am Amy, 33 years old, and I have lived most of my life believing that silence was safety, that keeping my head low and my words hidden was the only way to survive in a family filled with secrets that burned hotter than fire. But the night my mother grabbed my hand, her eyes wild with desperation, her fingers cold as though death itself had already touched her skin, everything I thought I knew fractured into pieces I could no longer fit together. "If you want to live, never reveal this secret," she whispered, her voice trembling not just with fear but with the weight of something catastrophic, something that had stalked us for years, something I had never dared to imagine. I felt her nails dig into my palm, as though she wanted to leave behind a permanent reminder of those words. Hours later, I found her lifeless body in her room, her lips pale, her eyes open as if she had died mid-thought. The sound of my own scream that night still rings in my ears, a haunting echo I cannot silence. I clutched her hand, now icy, and begged her to wake up, begged her to tell me what the secret was, begged her not to leave me alone in a house that suddenly felt like a tomb. But she was gone, and with her death came a darkness that refused to let me rest. I couldn't call anyone, not yet. My father was gone on one of his mysterious trips that always lasted too long and ended with questions no one dared to ask. My younger cousins, who lived with us after their parents' disappearance, were already asleep in the East Wing, far from the terror unfolding in my room. The clock ticked past midnight as I sat there frozen, her body in front of me, and my mind racing in circles. What was the secret? Who was it about? And why did she believe I would die if I revealed it? Every creak of the old house made my heart stop. I felt like someone was watching me, waiting for me to slip, waiting for me to scream again. And then, as if the universe wanted to answer my questions, I heard a faint knock on the door. Not the front door. Not the kind of knock you welcome. It came from inside the house, from the basement door at the end of the hallway. Slow, deliberate, each knock spaced too evenly to be accidental. My blood ran cold. My mother's body lay still behind me, and I realized I was alone with death on one side and danger on the other. The knock at the basement door echoed through the silence like a warning, each thud a message written in invisible ink that only my trembling bones seemed able to read. I forced myself to rise, my knees weak, my throat dry as though the air had turned into sand. My mother's body still lay behind me, her lifeless form urging me both to run and to stay still, and I couldn't decide which was safer. The basement in our house was forbidden territory. I had never been allowed near it as a child. "That door is locked for a reason," my mother used to say with a firmness that never cracked. I had always thought it was simply a storage place, filled with broken furniture, old memories, and the kinds of things families throw out but never quite get rid of. But that night, the sound from behind the door was not the rustling of forgotten things. It was steady, intentional, human. I pressed my back against the wall, staring down the hallway, my ears straining to catch the slightest movement beyond the knocking. Then, after what felt like hours but was only seconds, the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. I wanted to believe it was my imagination, but then came the sound of metal, keys jingling, sliding into a lock. My heart slammed against my ribs, as though trying to break free of my chest. No one had access to that basement but my father, and he was away. Or so I thought. Slowly, the handle turned. My breath caught as the basement door creaked open, darkness spilling out like ink spreading across water. I couldn't see who, or what, stood beyond it. All I could make out was a faint silhouette, tall and unmoving, as though it were waiting for me to make the first move. The instinct to scream returned, but I bit it down, knowing any sound might seal my fate. My mother's words rang in my head. "If you want to live, never reveal this secret." What secret? Did it live in that basement? Did the shadow standing there already know I was aware of its existence? My legs moved without my permission, carrying me backward step by step until I felt the cold wood of my mother's bedroom doorframe press against my shoulder blades. The shadow did not move. It simply stood there, in the open basement doorway, like a predator studying prey. Then, with a slow precision that made my skin crawl, It reached up and placed a finger to its lips, a gesture of silence. My body locked up. Whoever it was, or whatever it was, knew about the secret, and now it knew that I knew too. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the figure slipped back into the basement, closing the door behind it with a soft click. The house returned to silence, but it was no longer the silence of grief. It was the silence of a trap, one I had already stepped into. I stood frozen against the doorframe, my lungs refusing to expand as though the very air inside the house had turned poisonous. My mother's body was still on the bed behind me, her lifeless eyes wide open, her last words echoing in my head like a curse. That basement door, now closed, looked more sinister than it ever had, as though the wood itself was breathing, aware of the terror it concealed. I thought of calling the police, dialing the only number I could trust, but the phone was in the living room, past the hallway that now felt like a gauntlet. And worse, what could I even say? Someone just came out of the basement, put a finger to their lips, and vanished. They would either laugh at me or assume I was hysterical from shock. But I wasn't imagining it. That presence was real. That shadow had weight. And whoever it was wanted me to remain silent. I glanced at my mother's still face, searching for answers she could no longer give. Her hand was still cold in mine, the imprint of her grip earlier that evening etched into my palm. I tried to think logically. If the figure had wanted to hurt me, it could have done so already. Why the warning? The gesture of silence. Was I being threatened or protected? My heart screamed at me to leave the house, but another part of me, one I didn't recognize, wanted to open that basement door and see what secrets my family had buried beneath the foundation. Fear and curiosity wrestled inside me until I thought my skull would split. Then came the creak of a floorboard. Not from the basement this time, but from the hallway itself. My head snapped toward the sound, and I saw movement in the shadows near the staircase. A second figure? My pulse hammered in my throat. I backed into my mother's room and quietly shut the door, pressing my weight against it as though that flimsy barrier could save me. The silence stretched, broken only by the ticking of the clock and the erratic thudding of my heartbeat. I forced myself to look out through the thin crack between the door and the frame. For a long moment I saw nothing, and then, I swear to God, I saw an eye staring back at me, unblinking, its pupil wide like a black hole. I stumbled back in horror, clapping a hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. When I dared to look again, the crack was empty, the hallway silent. I realized then that whatever was happening was not random. This was all tied to the secret my mother had tried to protect me from. And whether I wanted it or not, I was now in the middle of a game that had already claimed her life. The room felt smaller, as if the walls were leaning in to listen. I pressed my back harder against the door and let my forehead rest against the wood, keeping my breath shallow so as not to invite whatever prowled the hall. Memories of childhood games and whispered lessons came to me, how my mother taught me to notice small things, how she would say a detail could save a life. Now those lessons felt grotesque, like riddles left unsolved. I had to move, to do something concrete rather than be paralyzed by dread. But every plan unraveled under the weight of uncertainty, calling the police, fleeing to a neighbor, waking the cousins, all possibilities that could either save me or lead to immediate danger. I thought of the old journals my mother kept in the drawer by her bedside, the leather-bound books she would write in when she thought no one watched. Maybe the answers were there. Maybe the secret was written in her looping script. I slid off the bed and crouched, each muscle protesting, carrying my mother's body a few inches to the side, so I could reach the drawer. My fingers found the cool metal knob and I turned it as quietly as I could. The drawer yielded with a soft sigh, revealing a stack of notebooks tied with faded ribbons, photos clipped to pages, and a single key on a leather thong. My hands trembled as I lifted the top book. It smelled of dust and lemon oil, a scent so familiar it made my chest ache. On the first page was my mother's handwriting, "For Amy, if the time comes." I almost laughed at the absurdity, a broken sound that died in my throat. Had she planned for this? Had she known the night would end like this and prepared a way for me to find the truth? Then I noticed annotations in the margins, dates and names, little arrows pointing to other pages. One entry stood out, written in a hurried hand. "Do not trust the ones who smile with our name." I ran my finger along the ink until it smeared, as though the words themselves were wet with urgency. The key on the leather thong had a small tag with an address scrawled in the same hand, a place I had never heard of, tucked away in a district of the city that was rarely spoken about in our home. My throat closed at the sight. The basement door's warning reverberated in my skull. Silence, secrecy, survival. If my mother had planned this, had left breadcrumbs for me, then she must have known about the danger long before tonight. Questions multiplied like crows in my mind, each louder than the last. Who were the smiling ones? What lay at that address? And perhaps most terrifying, how many people in my life were part of the secret? I clutched the book to my chest, the leather warm from my grip, and made a decision that felt both reckless and inevitable. I would follow the trail she left. But first, I had to make sure I wasn't leading anyone straight into a trap. I set the journal back into the drawer, slid the key into my pocket, and breathed a careful prayer my mother would have recognized. The house remained still, but the quiet was no longer blank. It vibrated with potential, like a wire-strung taut, waiting for a single touch to sing. I needed allies, but whom could I trust? The cousins were children, their loyalty untested. My father, if he returned, had answers he refused to share. I thought of my closest friend, Serena, who had always been blunt and fierce, the sort of woman who could argue with a storm and win. But betrayal can wear a familiar face. I had to be cautious. Without looking back, I eased the bedroom door open, the crack revealing the hallway that smelled faintly of my mother's perfume and something metallic, blood or oil or something else. I took one step and then another, the floorboards complaining like wounded animals beneath my feet. At the base of the stairs, a scrap of paper had been slipped under the newel post. I reached down and unfolded it, my fingers moving with a speed that contradicted the terror. The note bore a single line written in a hand I recognized. "Don't trust the name. Check the photo." Attached was a Polaroid, edges yellowed, showing a group of people, my father among them, smiling in a way that did not reach their eyes. At the center was a woman I had seen only once at a wedding, someone my mother warned me never to cross. My stomach dropped as I recognized the details, the pendant she wore, the scar near her brow. Everything my mother had feared seemed to converge into that brittle photograph, a snapshot that folded years of secrets into a single moment. My hands shook as I held the photo. Its weight was heavier than paper should be, heavy with implication, heavy with guilt. Behind the smiling faces, I now saw a map of small betrayals, a ledger of favors called in, an economy of silence that had been traded for power. I folded the photo slowly, as if folding might make sense of everything. A cold resolve settled over me. Whether by fate or design, I would unspool this web and learn who had woven it. No luck. I tucked the Polaroid into the journal and pressed it tightly against my chest, as if holding it close could stop the cold terror crawling along my spine. The air in the hallway had thickened, heavy with the ghost of my mother's final breath, heavy with the warning in her grip. I thought of leaving the house immediately, thought of running into the night barefoot, no plan, no destination, but the secret had already hooked its claws into me. If I ran now, the questions would chase me, and the danger would find me blind. I needed clarity, and clarity meant facing the shadows instead of fleeing them. My eyes shifted back toward the basement door, at the far end of the hall. Its wood looked ordinary, even worn, but after tonight, it might as well have been a portal to another world. The figure that had emerged from it, silent and deliberate, lingered in my mind. Who was it? Why had it hushed me instead of striking me down? The gesture implied complicity, or perhaps warning, but in either case, it meant the basement was central to everything. My mother's cryptic words, the key with the address, the photograph, they were all threads woven into that darkness below. A rush of reckless determination filled me. My fingers fumbled in my pocket for the key, half expecting it to fit into the lock on that forbidden door, though the tag suggested it belonged elsewhere. But before I could move closer, a floorboard groaned upstairs. I froze, blood draining from my face. The cousins were too young to walk with such measured steps, their feet pattered, uneven, playful. This sound was deliberate, slow, heavy, cautious. Someone else was in the house. I strained my ears, each second stretching like a lifetime, until I heard it again. A creak, followed by another. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to hide. They wanted me to know they were there. A shiver ran through me as I realized I was caught between two dangers, the unknown below and the predator above. Instinct pushed me toward my mother's room, but my hand hesitated on the doorframe. To lock myself in again would be to wait for the inevitable. I needed mobility, the chance to slip away, to outmaneuver whoever stalked me. Gathering the courage that felt borrowed rather than mine, I tiptoed toward the staircase, my body pressed low, my breath shallow. At the foot of the stairs, I peered upward. The dim light revealed only the banister and the curve of the steps leading to the second floor, shadows swallowing everything beyond. Then I saw it, a hand, pale and still, curled lightly around the railing. My pulse thundered in my ears. The hand didn't move, didn't grip tighter, didn't retreat. It simply stayed there, as if its owner were waiting for me to acknowledge it. I stepped back, clutching the journal like a shield. A whisper drifted down the stairs, so faint I almost believed I imagined it. Amy, my name, drawn out like a thread pulled taut. I staggered back into the hallway, colliding with the wall. The voice wasn't my cousin's nor my father's. It was female, older, commanding. It carried an authority that made my knees weaken, a familiarity I couldn't place. My mother's last warning echoed louder in my head. If you want to live, never reveal this secret. But the voice above already knew me, already claimed me. And when I dared to look again, the hand was gone. The absence of the hand was worse than its presence, because now every corner of the house seemed capable of birthing it again, attached to a body I dared not imagine. My stomach churned with dread, yet my limbs carried me backward toward the center of the hallway, caught between the lure of the basement door and the shadowy staircase above. For a moment, I wished my mother could rise from her bed, scold me with her familiar firmness, and tell me exactly what to do. But all I had were her last words, vague as smoke yet sharp enough to cut. Never reveal this secret. The more I turned them over in my head, the more I feared they weren't just a warning. They were a command. My survival depended on obedience. But obedience to what? To silence? To ignorance? My fists tightened around the journal as though squeezing it could force out answers. I flipped it open again, pages trembling beneath my frantic fingers until I landed on another entry marked with a jagged star. The handwriting here was more chaotic, letters slanting as though written in haste. The watchers are in the house. They never leave. If she sees you, pretend you know nothing. My breath hitched. The voice upstairs. Was that she? A watcher? My mother had known they were here, had anticipated this night. The page blurred as tears filled my eyes, hot and unwelcome, but I wiped them away and forced myself to read further. Do not go upstairs. Do not let them take you. The key is the only way forward. My hand shot to my pocket, feeling the small weight of the leather thong and the cold metal it carried. The address, yes, it was meant for me. But how could I leave the house without alerting whatever prowled above and within? As if in answer, a soft shuffle came from behind the basement door, the sound of something dragging across stone. I bit my lip to keep from crying out. Whoever had hushed me earlier was still there. Friend or foe, I couldn't tell. But maybe they weren't trying to hurt me. Maybe they wanted me to escape. My instincts screamed to flee outside, but the main door required crossing the staircase's line of sight. My only alternative lay downward, into the basement's suffocating dark. The thought twisted my stomach, yet the note in my mother's journal left no choice. Upstairs meant capture. I turned slowly, heart pounding as I approached the forbidden door. Each step felt like treason against every warning my mother had given me as a child. When I reached the door, I placed my palm on its worn surface. The wood vibrated faintly, as though something pressed against it from the other side, listening. With trembling fingers, I tried the knob. It was unlocked. A wave of nausea rolled through me. Slowly, carefully, I pulled it open. Cold air gushed upward, thick with the stench of earth, rust, and something faintly sweet, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. Shadows yawned before me, swallowing the staircase that descended into the unseen. My breath fogged in the chill. And then, just before I stepped down, a whisper rose from the darkness, clearer than the one upstairs, deliberate and unmistakable. "Amy, don't look back." The voice from the basement coiled around me like smoke, its command both terrifying and oddly protective. My name on the stranger's tongue made my skin prickle. How did they know me? My instinct was to whirl around, to see if the watcher upstairs still lingered, but the warning pressed against my skull. "Don't look back." My breath stuttered as I gripped the railing, each finger trembling, and forced myself to descend the narrow stairs. The wood groaned beneath my weight, every creak announcing my trespass. The darkness grew thicker with each step, swallowing the faint light from the hallway until only a dim bulb, flickering weakly at the bottom, guided my path. My heart pounded with such violence, I feared it would give me away. At the final step, the basement revealed itself, stone walls damp with age, shelves lined with boxes, and in the center, a heavy wooden table scarred with knife marks. My stomach knotted. This was no storage space. It was a place of rituals, a chamber of secrets carefully curated. I set the journal down and let the bulb's light flicker across its pages. Dust motes danced in the beam, swirling like spirits. Then movement caught my eye. In the far corner, half shrouded in shadow, stood the figure I had seen earlier. Tall, shoulders bent, face obscured by a hood. The same one who had raised a finger to silence me. My body stiffened, caught between the urge to flee and the magnetic pull of revelation. The figure lifted a hand again, but this time, instead of a gesture for silence, they extended it toward me, palm open, as though offering trust. My throat constricted. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice breaking. For a long moment, there was no response, just the hum of the bulb and the dripping of unseen water. Then the voice came, low and strained, like someone unaccustomed to speech. "I am what she kept from you." My knees nearly gave out. "You knew my mother?" I asked. The figure tilted their head, then stepped forward into the light. My blood ran cold. The face revealed was eerily familiar, like a reflection warped by time, eyes the same gray as my own, cheekbones sharp like my mother's, but etched with lines of torment. "I am your sister," she said, voice heavy with sorrow. My world tilted. I gasped, shaking my head violently. "That's impossible. I don't have a sister." The woman's lips curved into something between a smile and a grimace. "That's the secret, Amy. You were never meant to know I existed. But now that she's gone, the Watchers will come for you too." The words crashed over me with the force of a tidal wave, each syllable tearing at the foundation of everything I thought I knew. My mother, my guiding light, my stern protector, had hidden an entire sister from me? My breath quickened, panic squeezing my chest as I staggered backward, clutching the journal like a lifeline. "No," I whispered, shaking my head so hard the room blurred. "You're lying. I would have known. I would have felt it." But the woman stepped closer, her eyes burning with a truth I didn't want to face. "You did feel it," she said softly, her tone half accusation, half lament. "The shadows, the whispers in this house, the warnings you couldn't explain, those were because of me. Our mother tried to shield you, to erase me from the story, but blood has its own language. Haven't you ever wondered why you were always forbidden from the basement?" Her words sank in, chilling me deeper than the damp stone walls ever could. My entire childhood, the warnings, the locked doors, the unanswered questions, all of it began to rearrange itself in my memory, forming patterns I hadn't seen before. "Why?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "Why would she hide you? Why would she lie?" A shadow passed over her face, and she looked away, her jaw tight. "Because I wasn't meant to live," she said finally, her tone hollow. Because I was born into a bargain. She couldn't escape. My knees weakened, and I gripped the edge of the scarred table for support. What do you mean, bargain? Her eyes snapped back to mine, haunted yet fierce. Our family is tied to them. The Watchers. They don't just haunt this house, they own it. They own us. Mother gave me to them when I was born, in exchange for your life. She thought she could hide me, keep me in the dark, but secrets rot. Amy. And now that she's gone, they'll come to collect. My skin prickled, my heart thundering as images flashed through my mind. The eye at the crack in the door, the hand on the banister, the voice that knew my name. All the warnings in the journal, the photo with the smiling strangers. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't grief. It was real, a legacy of corruption and silence that had stalked me since birth. I wanted to scream, to deny it, to run up the stairs and burst out of the house into the night. But some part of me, the part that had inherited my mother's sharpness, her resilience, anchored me in place. If what you say is true, I said, my voice trembling but determined, then why are you here now? Why reveal yourself to me? My sister, if she truly was that, looked at me with eyes that mirrored my own, and for the first time, I saw not just sorrow but urgency. Because you're the only one who can end it, she whispered. The key your mother gave you, it's not just for an address. It's for the truth. And if you don't use it, Amy, neither of us will survive the night. I stood in the basement with my sister before me, the bulb buzzing above like an accusing jury. Her confession had turned the floor beneath my feet into a ledger of debts I had never known I owed. Everything felt suddenly chronological, as if memory itself had been catalogued and denied me piece by piece. I pressed my palm flat to the scarred table to steady my tremor and forced my voice to a whisper. If you were given away, I said, why hide you? Why keep me in the dark my whole life? She closed her eyes and the room inhaled with her. Our mother did what she had to. Amy, she murmured. She kept you because she loved you, and she hid me because she feared them. But loving you meant bargaining with monsters. A cold rage rose in me, part sorrow and part fury. Monsters who own us, I repeated, tasting the phrase as one might test poison. How do they own us? What do they want? Her fingers, long and pale, traced a circle on the table as though mapping wounds. They control information, favors, arrests, the machinery that destroys a life quietly. In exchange for wealth, protection, or silence, they demand a life sometimes. They took me as the debt our family owed, and they took others in ways you cannot imagine. I felt the weight of those words like stones in my chest. A conspiracy that fed on favors and fear, a bureaucracy of oppression hidden beneath polite smiles and handshake agreements. The Polaroid, the journal, the key, they were not just clues. They were the currency of a system built to survive by burying its mistakes. So, the Watchers are people? I whispered. Not ghosts. She looked at me with pity so raw it hurt. They are people who have fed on silence until they became monstrous. They walk in daylight wearing suits and charity pins. They dine with judges and counselors. But they also send those who collect, those who enforce the bargains. That's what lives in our house. Ammunition of disbelief collided with a factual clarity. The people who watched us were both everyman and predator, comfortable in boardrooms, yet capable of cruelty that smelled faintly of bleach and old money. I thought of the hand on the banister and the eye at the crack. Small gestures of surveillance by human actors, not apparitions. Can they be stopped? I asked, the question bare and needy. She smiled, a broken little crescent that did not reach her eyes. They can be weakened. They can be exposed. But it costs. It costs everything we hold dear, sometimes literally. Her eyes flicked to the journal. Your mother left you tools because she hoped one day someone with courage and a clean conscience would finish what she started. The key leads to a file, Amy, a ledger of names, transactions, and signatures. It's proof. Proof that can shatter them. I swallowed. Proof meant risk. Risk meant enemies. Enemies meant reprisals that might not spare the innocent. The cousins laughed in the other wing of the house like ghosts of a simpler life. If I moved, they might be dragged into the mud. If I stayed, the watchers would come, sharp and inevitable. I thought of my mother's final grip and the way she had etched her last command into me. Silence might save me, but it could also doom others if the corruption remained unchecked. She reached into her sleeve and drew out a folder, the edges soft with use. Inside were brittle papers, photocopies, scribbled receipts, evidence smeared into history. "This is a start," she said. "But to use it you must play them at their own table. You must be clever, Amy. You must learn to move like them, speak like them, smile like them, until the ledger can slit the throat of their power." My hands shook as I took the papers. The pages smelled of photocopier toner and stale hope. As I flipped through names, I felt nausea and clarity at once. There were signatures I recognized from charity gala programs, names whispered in our family as beneficial patrons. There were also names I could never have imagined, judges, contractors, a councilman. The network reached into places I trusted and loved. I imagined standing beneath a streetlight with this folder, watching the city breathe, knowing the next move might set a chain in motion. Outside, the house seemed to hush as if listening. The air in the basement felt thick with consequence. "If we go public," I said, "what happens to the kids? To the cousins? To you?" She met my gaze and, for the first time, I saw resolve like iron under morning. "There are ways to protect them," she replied. "There are people who have been fighting this for years. We are not alone entirely. But this is a scorpion's nest, Amy. To save ourselves, we must sting at the heart." I folded the papers into my dress, feeling their sharp corners. Every name a trigger. I had a choice, sleep in silence or wake a city. My mother's death pressed like a verdict. I inhaled, and the decision settled into me like a promise. Now, I'll. The vow echoed in my skull with the cadence of a gavel, final and irreversible, though the sentence was one I had chosen. My sister's gaze clung to mine as if willing me to hold steady, her voice lowering into a rasp that stitched itself into my bones. "Once you decide, there is no retreat. They smell fear. They feed on hesitation." I clenched the brittle pages against my chest, the ink smearing faintly against my damp palms. "Then tell me how to begin," I whispered. Her hand drifted toward the journal, tapping the margin where our mother had scrawled the name of a law firm, half erased but legible under the glow of the flickering bulb. "Start here. They were once allies. Perhaps they still are. But tread carefully. Loyalty bends where money presses hardest." My pulse throbbed in my ears as I slid the papers into my satchel, the weight of them transforming the leather into a ticking bomb strapped to my side. Upstairs, I heard the faint shuffle of feet, maybe cousins wandering toward the kitchen, maybe something else. Every sound now felt coded, sinister. My sister pressed her fingers to my wrist, grounding me with that mirror touch of shared blood. "One more thing," she said. "The watchers already know the key has changed hands. They'll come for you tonight. Whether you run or stand, they'll test you." Ice crept into my lungs. "Test me how?" She tilted her head toward the ceiling, where the pipes trembled faintly. "Listen." At first I thought it was the settling of the house. Then I caught it, deliberate steps pacing above, heavier than the children's, too controlled to be random. A door creaked shut, and another opened with slow precision. My skin crawled. I bit back a scream, lowering myself instinctively into a crouch. "They're here," she breathed, eyes widening. "They've been here." A cascade of adrenaline surged through me, my mind fracturing into two voices, one urging me to flee into the night, the other hissing that running now meant surrendering every sacrifice my mother had made. I forced myself to steady, drawing air into my lungs in jagged gulps. "If they're here," I said through clenched teeth, "then we use it. We fight." She looked at me, pride and fear intermingling in her expression. "You sound like her," she murmured, a ghost of a smile flickering. The steps overhead grew louder, deliberate, as though whoever prowled above wanted us to hear. A thud followed, then silence, so dense I could hear my own pulse. I gripped the satchel, my knuckles blanching. "We can't stay in the basement," I hissed. "It's a trap." She nodded once, pulling a rusted blade from beneath a loose floorboard, pressing it into my hand with grim ceremony. The handle was worn smooth, as though generations had held it before me. "For when you can't talk your way out," she said. The metal was cold, heavy with expectation. Together, we crept toward the narrow staircase, the bulb flickering behind us as if in farewell. Each step upward groaned under our weight, announcing our approach to whoever waited. At the landing, the air shifted, colder, fouler. I tightened my grip on the blade. My mother's words replayed in my mind, her whisper carrying across death. "If you want to live, never reveal this secret." And yet here I was, armed with secrets, climbing into the jaws of those who wanted them buried forever. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched before us, shadows pooling like ink. A door at the far end stood ajar, a faint light spilling through, accompanied by the unmistakable rasp of someone breathing, steady and patient. I swallowed hard, my heart hammering against the satchel where names slept like coiled serpents. I turned to my sister, voice barely audible. "If we step through, there's no going back." Her reply was a whisper sharpened to steel. "Then don't step. Kick the door down." The hallway seemed to contract around us as we advanced, its wooden panels groaning like witnesses too terrified to intervene. Every nerve in my body screamed to turn and run, yet something deeper, a pulse inherited from my mother's final grip, propelled me forward. My sister flanked me, her breath shallow, her eyes locked on the thin slice of light spilling from the half-open door. We moved in sync, our steps deliberate, the silence punctured only by the soft creak of the floorboards beneath our weight. My hand tightened around the blade until the edge bit into my skin, a sting that anchored me to the moment. At the door, I inhaled once, steadying, then thrust my boot against the frame with all the strength I had. The wood splintered, the hinges shrieked, and the door crashed inward against the wall. The room beyond was small, windowless, lit by a single lamp whose glow fell upon a figure seated at a table. He did not flinch at our intrusion. Instead, he smiled, a predator's patience etched into every line of his face. His suit was immaculate, his tie perfectly knotted, but his eyes, the eyes, were the same ones I had seen peering through cracks, watching me since childhood. "Amy," he said smoothly, as though greeting an old friend. "At last." My stomach lurched. "Who are you?" My voice came out sharper than I expected, edged with defiance I barely felt. He gestured casually to the chair across from him, ignoring my sister's blade drawn and ready. "Sit. We have much to discuss." I did not move. Neither did she. His smile widened, a flash of teeth too rehearsed to be human warmth. "Your mother once sat where you stand. She made a choice that day. She bought you a life. And tonight, you'll decide whether that life ends or evolves." His words coiled in the air like smoke. "You're one of them," I whispered. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Names are irrelevant. Roles, however, matter. You have something that belongs to us." My hand instinctively pressed against the satchel at my side, the papers crinkling. His eyes flickered downward, sharp as a hawk's. "Ah, so she did leave you the ledger." My chest tightened. "It's not yours." His chuckle was low, humorless. "Everything is ours, Amy. Your house, your family, your breath. We gave your mother power in exchange for silence, and she betrayed us by planting seeds of rebellion. That journal, that key, the ledger, they are the weeds she nurtured. And weeds," he said, rising slowly from the chair, "must be cut." My sister stepped forward, blade raised. "You'll touch her over my dead body." He regarded her with something between amusement and disdain. "That was always the plan," he said softly. In an instant, the door behind us slammed shut, locking of its own accord. The lamp flickered, shadows stretching like claws across the walls. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as he advanced, the polished heels of his shoes clicking against the floor like a metronome counting down to an ending I couldn't yet see. The weight of the ledger pressed against my ribs, each name inside a fuse waiting to ignite. For the first time, I realized that survival was no longer enough. I couldn't just live. I had to fight. The room shrank to a coffin of flickering light and encroaching shadow as he advanced, his footsteps deliberate, each one dragging me closer to a decision I could no longer delay. My sister positioned herself between us, her blade gleaming under the weak lamp, but I knew steel alone would not sever the chains of corruption he represented. The ledger pulsed against my ribs like a second heartbeat, a reminder that I held more than paper. I held the possibility of collapse for an empire built on silence. "You can kill us," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my bones. "But every name in here will outlive you. Every transaction, every signature, exposed." His smile faltered, a fracture spreading across his mask of composure. "You don't understand the weight of what you carry," he hissed, his voice suddenly stripped of polish. "Revealing it will not bring justice. It will unleash chaos. Entire cities crumble when order is dismantled. Do you want blood on your hands, Amy?" The lamp sputtered, throwing his face into grotesque relief, half man, half shadow. My sister shot me a look, urgent and resolute, and in her eyes I saw not only the pain of a stolen childhood, but the fire of defiance that had kept her alive. I lifted the blade, holding it firm. "Chaos is better than silence," I declared, "because silence is what killed my mother." For the first time, fear flickered across his face. In that instant, I lunged, not to strike him, but to slam the blade into the wooden table between us, burying it through the brittle spine of the ledger I had placed there. The sound cracked like a gunshot, echoing through the walls. His composure shattered. He lunged forward, but too late. The blade pinned the ledger open, its pages fanned wide, the inked names staring up like an army of ghosts. My sister yanked the lamp, tipping it across the papers, and the thin flame caught the edges, fire racing through the ledger as though eager for liberation. His scream was inhuman, a sound not of physical pain, but of empire unraveling. He clawed at the pages, trying to smother the fire, but the ink bled and burned, filling the air with acrid smoke. The walls shook, the ceiling groaned, and I realized the house itself had been built on these secrets, its foundations cracking under their release. My sister grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the door, which now swung open as if the house itself rejected its master. We ran, smoke choking our lungs, the man's howls fading behind us. The night air struck my face like a baptism as we burst outside, the house behind us shuddering, flames licking at the windows like tongues of truth. We collapsed on the lawn, coughing, our hands gripping each other as the first sirens wailed in the distance. I looked at her, my sister, my shadow, my blood, and saw in her eyes the same question that haunted me. What comes next? Because destroying their ledger was only the first cut. The names were still branded into my memory, and I would carry them like weapons. My mother's whisper echoed in my ears, not as a warning this time, but as a challenge. If you want to live, never reveal this secret. And I had chosen to live by doing the opposite. The Watchers would regroup, and their power would not vanish overnight. But I was no longer the girl they could terrify with footsteps in the dark. I was the woman who had chosen to fight, who had chosen to transform tragedy into weapon, fear into resilience, silence into justice. The war was only beginning, but so was I. And if you've followed me through this story, through the secrets, the shadows, and the flames, then stay. Stand with me. Because what comes next will demand strength, resilience, and eyes that refuse to look away. Like this story, share it, and subscribe to witness every step of this battle. The Watchers silenced my mother. They tried to erase my sister. But they will not erase me. Not now. Not ever.